What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking college football. And today we're breaking down week 0. It's a very special day. College football is back. We are going to get into everything you need to know for these games, matchups, spreads, totals, everything. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what you want to see in these videos. Planning some graphics for the future, hopefully to dive into these matchups a little further. Not ready for week 0, but hopefully week 1, 2, something like that, we'll have this ready to go. For today, we'll just look at a live odds screen and talk about all the current numbers. Last thing, if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. But we have 4 games. We're going to go through all of them, starting with the marquee game of the day. In Dublin, it is Iowa State taking on Kansas State, a matchup in the Big 12. Here is the live odds screen where we can take a look at these lines currently. As it stands, Kansas State is a 3-point favorite. Total in the game is about a consensus 49.5. It's been hovering around 50. Don't think you see it really get any lower than this. But as far as these teams go, Iowa State, largely the same coaching staff. Matt Campbell is back in business for another year. Kansas State, same thing. This is the only game that does not have seismic coaching changes at some level. There's a little bit of position coach turnover for these teams, but it's largely the same. So expecting similar infrastructures for both teams. Iowa State last year was passing about 48.5% of the time. They were 61st. Kansas State was a little run heavier at 46.3%. They were 80th in pass rate. And then seconds per play, how was the pace for both of these teams? They were 70th and 72nd, basically right on average for both teams, which I think is a misconception, especially for Kansas State. People want to look back at Kansas State of old, where they were this very slow, methodical offense. They're not that anymore. They're not necessarily playing fast, but they're not slow either. So pace in this game projects to be pretty solid overall. As far as injuries go, there are a couple on Kansas State worth mentioning. Colby McAllister, one of their safeties, is doubtful for the game, which is impactful. And then there's a couple other players. Austin Newsome, one of their depth linebackers, is questionable. And Gunnar Maldonado, the Arizona transfer who's going to play safety for this Kansas State team, he's questionable. I think both of them go because this is a very important game. It's a conference game right off the jump. So that's really it. Iowa State's not really dealing with any. I guess we'll find out closer to game time, but it seems like they're the healthier team heading into this spot. Mentioned above, this is a conference game, and these teams played last year. It was a weird game. It finished 29-21 in favor of Iowa State. Iowa State did dominate the time of possession, but that was largely just because Kansas State made a lot of mistakes. They actually outgained Iowa State 364-324. That included the yards per play battle. They won 6.1 to 4.1. And a lot of it was just mistakes. They fumbled on the opening drive, which gave Iowa State a 27-yard touchdown drive. They did the same thing later in the game where they gave Iowa State a 30-yard touchdown drive. So they basically handed over 14 points. They missed a field goal. Iowa State did as well for that matter. And then there were a number of turnover on downs in the red zone or inside enemy territory that resulted in no points. Kansas State had one on the 29. Iowa State had one on the 7. So it was overall a pretty sloppy game. And there are a lot of ways this runs out where you see it get well above the 50-point total. And I mention that because you now have pace. You have a previous data point from last season, which largely both offenses succeeded and were efficient. I think the total's a little low in this game, but more on that in a bit. As far as the player personnel goes, you have a lot returning for both teams, especially at QB. 2 veteran signal callers. Rocco Becht is back, 6'1", 210. Pretty good season last year, 59.5% completion for 3,500 yards, 25 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 22 big-time throws, 20 turnover-worthy plays. He's kind of mobile, 318 yards. There was 3.2 yards per carry. A lot of that was elevated because he only took 10 sacks, which is a credit to him. This offensive line was not very good, and he was able to navigate pressure and still finish with only 10 sacks. Now, he was the 48th most efficient quarterback in college football. There still is some stuff he can clean up, primarily those interceptable passes, which he needs to cut down on. But overall, he had a good season. as did Avery Johnson, did it in a different way, not quite as effective through the air with a 58.3% completion, 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 15 big-time throws, 14 turnover-worthy plays. He was actually better with the turnover-worthy plays than Becht. And one of the weird things on his profile, no quarterback had more, I guess I should say, a higher percentage of their passes dropped. On target passes, that is. He had 11.9, nearly 12% dropped. He only took 11 sacks. That's great too. His pressure to sack ratio was actually lower than Becht's, 9.2%. Time to throw was longer as well. So even though he was in the pocket longer and he did have a better O-line, he did not take a lot of negative plays. And then as a rusher, 605 yards, 7 scores. That's how you get him as an overall more efficient quarterback than Becht. He just does more for the offense. He's not taking the sacks similar to Becht, but he's running. You can actually use him on design carries. He's a smaller guy, so that needs to maintain through the season, which is always a question with him. This is week 0, so health shouldn't be something that we really have to worry about for him yet. Overall, the quarterback position is pretty much a wash. Slight preference to the Kansas State side with the dual threat ability with Johnson. And the skill players probably favors Kansas State as well. I think both teams have pretty solid run games. Carson Hansen and Abu Sama, 2 guys that are both over 4.7 yards per carry through their career. Both are above 210 pounds. It's just something that they're going to rely on this run game probably a little more this year, considering they lost 2 NFL receivers. Kansas State also has a good run game. They are replacing DJ Giddens. Edwards is back, Dylan Edwards, the former Colorado transfer. Dynamic in a small sample, 7.4 yards per carry last year, but he's only 170 pounds. As we saw with Giddens, he's used best in a timeshare just for preservation. That's going to be Joe Jackson. He is over 200 pounds. He's been efficient in a small sample, but we haven't seen him work into a larger role yet. So that's at least a question with Kansas State. As far as the pass catchers go, I think both of these teams are going to rely a little more on 12 personnel, especially Iowa State, where you lose Noel, you lose Higgins. You're now moving forward with some low-level transfers, Chase Soule and Xavier Townsend as your top 2 receivers. Maybe Daniel Jackson comes back off the injury and he can do a little bit more. I'm not going to buy that just yet until we see it. Soule played with East Carolina. He was the number 1 there, but now he needs to bring that up into the Big 12. Townsend was the clear wide receiver 3 with UCF. He redshirted after not being happy with his role. What does he give you? So you're probably going to see 2 tight ends a majority of the time. Ben Brahmer is the primary receiving threat of this group. Big 6'7" tight end. Then you have Tyler Moore and Gabe Burkle. The problem is Moore and Burkle were both massive liabilities when on the field last year. They were below average blockers and basically replacement level receivers if we're being generous. Honestly, I think the Kansas State 12 personnel might be a little bit better. You have Garrett Oakley, who outperformed really all of them except Brahmer from a receiving perspective, but more well-rounded. Braden Lofton, Will Anseau both have some experience. And then Lincoln Cure is the highest recruit in program history at Kansas State, depending on the recruiting service. A high 4-star tight end who is going to play a role, maybe not in week 0, but at some point. I think they can use 12 personnel and use it just as effectively as Iowa State. And then the wide receiver room, Jace Brown, 47 catches last year. If he cleans up the drops a little bit, could have been even better for him. And he was still at 2.3 yards per route, which was solid. Then you bring in Jaron Bradley, Boston College and Texas Tech through his career. Now he comes over to Kansas State. And then Jerron Tibbs. We don't really know what we're getting from him. He's the Purdue guy. He played with Purdue. It's just kind of a mess coming from there. But overall, I think the skill position group is a little deeper for Kansas State as well when compared to Iowa State. And they have a little bit more proven production, an actual wide receiver 1 and some dynamic backs and tight ends. Getting to the offensive line, it's a really tough group to decipher, especially on the Iowa State side. When you try to blend returning production with what to expect moving forward, you get kind of this log jam at Iowa State. They have 5 back with starting experience, but this unit was 112th in pass blocking, 119th in run blocking. They were all awful. And that's kind of been the case for them for a while now. Can we actually rely on returning starting experience if it's bad? And the model we use for our lines, our totals, it's from the player level up, which I don't know if a lot of people do, but when you look at the player level up, we're trying to project what to expect from a player in the subsequent year, not what they did the previous year, which factors in growth. Players generally get better year over year. However, when you're 112th in pass blocking, 119th in run blocking, growth generally doesn't mean this is a top 20 unit now. This is an offensive line with a lot of concerns. In Kansas State, even though they have 3 starters back rather than 5, this unit was much, much stronger. 34th in pass blocking, 42nd in run blocking. The transfers they bring in are from high-level programs. J.P. Nelson's from Penn State, George Fitzpatrick from Ohio State, Amos Talele from USC. This is the better offensive line, and there's a chance it's by a substantial margin if Iowa State hasn't rapidly improved the poor unit we saw last year. As far as defense goes, I think both teams have their concerns. Iowa State was really hurt last year, especially at the linebacker position. They did lose quite a bit, and especially when you look at this unit up front, they're just returning Dominique Orange. They lose their other defensive tackle. This was a unit that wasn't particularly good. They were 120th in run defense, 121st in pass rush. So now you have 3 starters gone from the defensive line. You're going to be reliant on largely Dominique Orange because your transfers are all really low-level players. We're talking about Cannon Butler from Northern Iowa, Von Troy Malone from Tulsa, Tamatoa McDonough from Yale. I just don't think they did enough on the defensive line to actually compete with some of the big heavies in this conference. And then you look to the back 7. Linebacker, I don't think there's any way around them being better. They were playing walk-ons last year at points. So you get back Bacon, you get back the players that were hurt, they should be fine. In the secondary, you lose 4 starters, and there's 2 back with experience. But, I mean, this goes to the transfer portal again. Either we're relying on unproven depth or the transfers they brought in are really low level. We're talking Trey Bell from Lindenwood. He's the only transfer in the secondary. It's just really inexperienced depth now going up against a veteran signal caller. And that's not even to mention, you just look at their defense overall. They were 84th last year. Now they're losing a lot of their good players. Kansas State was 77th. They lose a fair amount as well, but they're coming from a position where they already had a little bit more in place. They are returning 3 starters on the defensive line. They're returning a lot of rotational pieces. Now, their defensive line was a little imbalanced, 34th against the run, 100th in pass rush. But you do bring in Jayshon Ross, a former 4-star from Alabama. He will bolster that pass rush unit. The defensive line edge should go to Kansas State. In the linebacker room, even with Iowa State getting healthier, I think you still have an edge Kansas State's direction. Austin Romaine was an absolute stud, and he's a player in coverage that played really well. When you get to the back end, this is where I think you might see a weakness for Kansas State compared to Iowa State. And it's hard to say because both teams are largely remade. But we already mentioned it. There's a couple of injuries in the secondary for Kansas State already. Colby McAllister not expected to play, and Maldonado is up for grabs. We don't know if he's going to be out there. He's questionable. So that kind of leaves VJ Payne. Otherwise, like Jaden Rowe is a former 4-star transfer. I'm not sure who they're going to throw out there if these players can't actually get on the field. So that is a concern. But again, Iowa State being as rebuilt as they are with as many concerns as they have, this is not a team that projects to be trying to throw the ball over the top of you unless Townsend and Soule are just players that are much better than I personally think. But overall, I think it's the secondary that's going to get Kansas State in trouble in games this year. So overall, when you look at how these teams match up, first and foremost, you have significantly more talent Kansas State's direction. The concerns with this, there is a fair amount of returning production on the O-line. We're making the assumption they're not getting vastly better. We have this projected moving forward a little bit. That's one point of potential error in the models. This O-line just gets vastly better. Second, we're underrated the linebackers off of injuries. There's a chance this defense for Iowa State is a decent amount better than Kansas State's defense. I'll believe it when I see it. There are a lot of moving parts in low-level transfers, but there is a chance it's better if those all come together. Kansas State relying on a few more incumbents that weren't great. And then the quarterbacks. What is Rocco Beck giving you versus Avery Johnson? With the better weapons being on Kansas State's side, that is where we will lean. I took this Kansas State -3, took it at even money. So it's bouncing, or it basically you can find -110s out there. If it goes anywhere, it looks like it's going to go to 3.5 again. That's the sticking point. There's some 3.5s out there. But Overall, this is one we do pretty significantly favor the Wildcats in terms of our power rankings. We make this closer to a 5-point spread. In the total, we have over this as well. Going back to that briefly before our next game. Pace is average to above average for these teams. There are defensive questions with both sides. And the skill position groups, I think, are decent to above average, especially in the Kansas State side, which should help them moving the ball. So overall, we have this total coming in above 50 points, closer to 55. So I haven't taken that one yet, but one I am potentially going to look at as we get forward into this game. Let's take a look and see where the total is right now before we move on. Pretty sure this is sitting at 49.5, 50. But it could be something, 49.5 basically across the board. Apparently there's one rogue 49 out there sitting at minus 120. That's not great, but I think there's a chance this could go a little lower, so we're going to pause on that and stick with the spread at -3. All right, let's go to our second game. We're going to skip the FCS game. Sorry, guys. It's hard to get money down on the FCS where I live. That brings us to Fresno State and Kansas State. Consensus line out there is about -12.5 in favor of Kansas State. The total in the game, pretty low, sitting at 50.5 as well, 50 in some spots. A lot of changes for this. First of all, Kansas back to their home stadium. They didn't play there last year. But you have coaching changes on both sides. Fresno State is overhauling their whole team. Matt Entz comes in from North Dakota State as head coach. He hired Josh Davis from South Dakota as his OC, and then Nick Benedetto from Northern Illinois as the defensive coordinator. For Kansas, they're changing out offensive coordinators. Jeff Grimes goes to Wisconsin. Seems to be no love lost between the current staff and him. They bring in Matt Lubick from Nevada. He was pretty good down there, worked with a dual threat signal caller. I was impressed with their offense. I don't think that was the problem with Nevada. And he's going to be co-OCs with Jim Zembrowski, who was on the staff last year too. So some continuity for the coaching staffs. But on Fresno State, we're looking at seismic changes overall. Last year, this team was passing at the 20th highest rate in the country, 55.5%. South Dakota, that's where the OC Josh Davis is from, they threw the ball 39.5% of the time. First expectation change, much run heavier. Pace of play, last year, Fresno State was at 25.5. That was 46th. Seconds per play, that is. South Dakota was at 31.5. That would be among the slowest offenses in the FBS had South Dakota played at that level. Second meaningful change, expecting this to be way slower. Fresno State doesn't have great reporting. The first thing I'll say injury-wise is they had a lot of important transfers that weren't on the 2 deep. So I don't know who's hurt and what is going to happen with this team, but there's some guys to maybe watch. We'll get into that as the game gets closer. As far as Kansas goes, I'm not expecting a lot of offensive changes or defense for that matter. The offense, Lubick ran at Nevada, was very similar. Pace of play, just slightly faster. And then pass rate was a little bit higher. I think that's largely because they were a 3-10 team. If they had won more games, I think they would have tried to run a little bit more. But specifically, he had a dual threat, so that's something worth mentioning too. There's experience with guys like Daniels. There's not a lot of injuries with this team. Bryson Canty, the transfer receiver, is going to dress, but he may not play. He's been really limited in camp. And then they're going to rotate some positions, largely offensive line. I know they're going to rotate their left guard between Herring and Tuki Lovato. They're also going to rotate right tackle between Gortsiva and Enrique Cruz. You're also going to see multiple tight ends and receivers. That makes sense. Those positions are largely brand new. So those are the overarching changes for these two teams. Let's get into player personnel. Quarterback for Fresno State is E.J. Warner, the former Rice and Temple transfer. Interesting fit with him here in this offense where he's not going to be asked to do a lot. Last year was a disappointing season for him. He had 13 big-time throws, 22 turnover-worthy plays with Rice, only 6.2 yards per pass attempt. Basically regression across the board from his Temple days. The turnovers have been a consistent problem with him. He's consistently had more turnover-worthy plays than big-time throws. He's not mobile, and that's pretty surprising because his sack rate is really low. He only took 7 sacks last year and had a 5.4% pressure-to-sack ratio, still only finished with 12 yards. He is a pocket statue. He was the 85th most efficient quarterback in college football, largely just because he throws a lot of interceptions. He's not mobile. He doesn't offer a lot to your offense outside of just getting the ball underneath where it should be. Jalen Daniels, he's an interesting case study now, going to his third OC in 3 years. You have the Kotelnicki years. Those were the best years of Daniels. He did battle injury, but still you saw his average yards per attempt, 8.8, 16 big-time throws to 9 turnover-worthy plays, 425 rushing yards, all awesome. Then you saw significant regression in the Jeff Grimes system. His completion drops to 57%. His yards per attempt drops to 8.2. His turnover-worthy plays jump just a little bit, actually not too many. And then the rushing output still pretty good, 439 yards. And that's always going to be part of his game. He's 6'1", 220 pounds. He's never been a guy that takes a lot of sacks. The mobility helps there. He only had a 10% pressure to sack ratio. When you put all that into a blender, 44th most efficient quarterback in college football last year, and that was with the step back under Grimes. We've seen the ceiling moving forward. The problem is now he's just replacing every single skill position player of consequence. Running back Devin Neal's gone. All 3 receivers are gone. Tight end gone. So you're going to move forward with Daniel Highshaw and LaShawn Williams at running back. Highshaw's been with the team for a while behind Neal as a change of pace. Recently on the Bruce Feldman freak list, I truly didn't know he was athletic as he is. Both him and LaShawn Williams, the Iowa transfer, are over 210 pounds. Both have been efficient on small samples. So that's a good place to start. Receivers, I don't think they quite live up to last year after losing their top 3, but there's a weird blend of lower level production and elite recruits that are unproven. Emmanuel Henderson, the former 4-star from Alabama, has really been on the scene. But then you got Cam Pickett from Ball State, Bryson Canty from Columbia, assuming he plays. They're going to join a tight end group that's fairly deep. You're looking at Broden Grown coming in from Rice, joining, like a Deshaun Hanika. So there is some tight end experience if they do want to go more 12. This group is more impressive to me than what Fresno State has in terms of their skill position players. There was a surprise in the depth chart where they listed Bryson Donaldson as the RB1. He was pretty efficient on a small sample, 6 yards per carry. He's a decent recruit for this level, so I'm not surprised he won, but I still thought it would be Elijah Gilliam, who filled in admirably last year. And he was also the third string behind Rayshawn Luke, the Arizona transfer. I think they use 3 backs. They obviously want to be a power run game. I'm just not sure they're going to be able to. And when they get down in games, who are they throwing the ball to? This receiving core is awful. Josiah Freeman's probably their number 1 receiver. He had 8 catches last year. Jordan Brown is a 0-star recruit. He had 9 catches last year. Ezekiel Avitt, the Maryland transfer, couldn't get on the field at Maryland. Your tight end room, a disaster. Richie Anderson up at the top. So if you're not able to run the ball and play with a lead, this group could be in trouble fast. This is a significant advantage, Kansas, which should be no surprise to anyone. The offensive line, this is where I have no idea what Fresno State is doing. They lost 3 full-time starters. They're benching another one. Torian Penwright is listed as a backup at left tackle now. He wasn't very good, but they're starting a freshman left tackle in Braden Walton. He's 6'7", 325. I don't expect good things in week 1 or week 0, but we'll see. The only offensive lineman that's back who projects above average is Jacob Spomer. He was hurt a lot of last year, but he came back and played well. He's going to be their center, it looks like. They did add 4 Power 4 transfers on the offensive line. None of them were on the 2 deep, not even backups. So I have a lot of questions with this staff. You're playing incumbents, low-level guys over Power 4 transfers. Maybe there's a chance all 4 of them are bad. I would be surprised. Regardless, the guys that were providing you a ceiling on your offensive line, the players that have the talent to potentially reach a higher level, weren't good enough to be on the 2 deep. Expecting pretty bad things from this Fresno offensive line. That was good last year. They were 64th in pass blocking, 30th in run blocking, but this could be a disaster. Kansas, they're returning 2 starters from a unit that was 13th in pass blocking, 7th in run blocking. They're good starters too. Kobe Baines and Bryce Foster are going to play the interior. We already talked about the coach coming out and saying they're going to rotate some of their positions, primarily right tackle and left guard. That raises some minor questions. I'm not sure Fresno can exploit it regardless. I think Kansas does take a step back on their offensive line, but is it really impactful against Fresno State, who had a questionable defense last year? They were 79th overall, 72nd against the run, 103rd in pass rush, 56th in coverage. I will say their edge group is mildly intriguing. Corey Foreman's a former 5-star. They brought in Finn Claypool, who's from the FCS. He's from Drake, but he was very productive down there. I just don't think there's enough juice inside. They lost their top 3 defensive tackles. They do not have clear replacements. So, yeah, you have some potential shuffling on the offensive line for Kansas. I don't think this Fresno's team can exploit it. Then in the linebacker room, it's brand new. Jaden Pearson from Utah State, Kavion Thunderbird from Arizona State. They're going to start. They're probably going to be average players, and there's no depth. The secondary was the best unit last year. It's probably going to be the best unit this year, largely on the back of Azili and Hamilton, their shutdown corner. I think you could also point to Cameron Baccia at safety, who was hurt. He's probably going to be an above-average player. Jaden Davis was an above-average player. That's a formidable trio. But who's rounding out the secondary? Jakari Embry is going to start. He was brutal last year, so there's a chance there's just a complete weakness in this defense that you can pick on right out of the jump in the secondary. So I do think the defense is the best part of Fresno State's team. I think there's enough holes where I'm not super concerned with Kansas being able to get there and score enough points. But man, there's a lot of potential questions with this team. On the Kansas defense, they're losing a ton. They're losing a lot in the secondary. This is a brand new team essentially across the board. The defensive line, I think, is pretty decent, and it's a unit that wasn't that good last year. They were 93rd against the run, 102nd in pass rush. They were 91st in coverage, just to round it out. Dean Miller's back. He's going to play alongside former 4-star Dylan Brooks, and there's quietly multiple 4-stars on this edge group. So I think that is probably a position that could take a step forward from 102nd. Then you'd have they rotated a ton on the defensive line. Tommy Dunn, DJ Withers, Blake Harrell, they all had at least 275 snaps, and they were all above average too. 2 of them were above 300 pounds. So you're playing this power run game in Fresno State, a brand new power run game with a statue quarterback that you don't have to account for. I think you can just load the box with this defensive line and quietly eat up that unit. Linebacker is not ideal. J.B. Brown is gone. He was a stud for this team. But you come in with some pretty good transfers. Bengali Kamari played with South Carolina last year, took a red shirt. He was with Pitt before that. He was awesome. Trey Lathan from West Virginia, Joseph Sipp from Bowling Green. They have experience. They don't have the highest level production, but as long as one of them can step up, you should be pretty good at linebacker. And the secondary is brand new. I won't pretend to know how this is all going to come together. I will say the transfers they brought in are pretty solid. They're all from the Power 4 with the exception of DJ Graham, who comes in from Utah State. Well, DJ Graham, first of all, he was a solid starter at Utah State. And second, he spent his first 3 years with Oklahoma. So I don't think they're going to be horrible in the secondary, probably not live up to expectations. But again, this unit didn't live up to expectations last year. They were 91st in coverage. Not to mention Fresno State has no interest in throwing the ball anyway. So when you break this all down, I actually show some value on Fresno State plus a 12.5. And it's not because I think Fresno State's any good. Part of this comes down to pace. 50.5 is the over-under. I missed it at 51.5, where it showed quite a bit of value towards the under. Now we're getting a little closer to efficiency. The first thing is Kansas is not going to be they live through efficiency. They're not going to live through play volume. They're not going to live through explosiveness quite as much this year, considering all the departures. And then you have just a radical change with Fresno State, where you're now going to an extremely slow, methodical, run-heavy offense. And I don't think they're going to be able to maintain drives with this. So we have the under showing some value, which by proxy leads to Fresno State showing a little bit of value. I can't get to the window on either of these. I would have some interest in the narrative on Kansas. You know, they're going back to their home stadium, but you have the coaching staff basically coming out and saying, like, we're trying stuff out. We're rotating guys. We're seeing how things go. Doesn't seem to be all that serious to me of a game. So it's probably going to be a pass, looking more towards the under at 50.5 than anything else. So take a quick peek at that. You see that it hasn't moved. Forgot we were parked on the odds screen for this game in terms of the spread. Yeah, there's a rogue 51 out there. It's at circa too, actually. So yeah, you could play a 51. I think that's reasonable. It's not available to me, but that is my preference. Next game up is Sam Houston State against Western Kentucky. Total is there's not really a lot of consensus. 61.5, 62 is out there. You can find a 62.5 juice. So the total's between 61.5 and 62.5. The spread in the game is a consensus 10.5. Shame on me for missing the 10. You can find one rogue 10 out there at ESPN Bet, apparently, and that is, I don't know if that's a stale line. It's not even close to being the consensus. Looks like it's getting closer to 11.5 than the 10. So I don't know what they're doing, but apparently it's out there. I don't see it regularly. But anyway, a matchup in Conference USA, there's a ton of change with both teams, mainly on Sam Houston, where they lost Casey Keeler. He was awesome. They go out and they hire Phil Longo, the former Wisconsin OC. They bring in Zach Patterson as the current OC. Longo's going to call the plays, so not really anything to mention there. Freddie Autry comes in as DC. He was with NC State last year. That was a very good team. He was coaching linebackers. And then Western Kentucky. They lose their coordinators. That's happened with them almost every single year. The main change is Rick Bowie comes in as offensive coordinator from Abilene Christian. They bring in a pair of co-DCs. They're actually internal promotions, so it's not like they're bringing them in, but there's a new defensive play caller, to say that. So when you look at these changes, one other thing. We don't have it now, but Conference USA they're releasing injury reports 3 hours before kickoff. So expect some updated availability injury. I don't know what it's going to be exactly, but there's going to be some news on this conference that we didn't have last year. Okay, for the changes. Sam Houston State last year, they were passing about 39% of the time. That was 125th. People keep saying that Phil Longo's air raid is coming to this offense. I don't know if that's true. Last year, Wisconsin passed 47.8% of the time. They were around 50% in 23. Yeah, they had both their quarterbacks go down 2 consecutive years. So maybe Longo wasn't able to pass as much as he wanted to, but people keep calling this like the dairy raid coming to Texas. He was not throwing that much at Wisconsin. He was actually below average in pass rate last year. And they were getting slaughtered in games. They missed a bowl for the first time in a long time. So first of all, I don't think they're going to pass quite as much as people think. I'm expecting around 50%, but I don't think this is going to be full air raid, especially considering the personnel on this team is from a ball control, run-heavy offense from last year. And I don't know if their quarterback can throw. We'll get to him in a bit. Second, pace of play. Last year, Sam Houston was 100th. People keep talking about the pace of this Phil Longo air raid. Wisconsin was at 26.3 seconds per play. The average is 26.5. That puts them around like 65th in the country. So, I mean, this offense is playing a little above average in terms of pace, maybe a little above average in pass rate. I don't think you're quite getting the dairy raid you want with this offense. I could be wrong. And how you project that makes a huge difference to this total. So more on that in a second. But first of all, I think the changes maybe are a little bit overblown with this offense. Western Kentucky, I do think you see a fair amount of change here. Last year, they were passing about 50.5% of the time. That was 44th. Abilene Christian, that's where the new OC comes from. They were up at 56%, and they do bring in their quarterback too. So they'll be passing a lot. Pace of play, I don't think is crazy. 26.4 seconds per play last year is what Western Kentucky ran. That was 64th. People keep saying Abilene Christian ran over 1,000 plays. They played 14 or 15 games. I can't remember, but I did break it down into seconds per play. They took their time of possession divided by the plays they ran, 25.7. That's pretty fast, certainly above average, but we're still talking like 30th, 40th. This is not the USF offense. This is not the Tennessee offense, at least not last year. They're going to be fast. They're going to be above average, but this is not the breakneck run a play as fast as you possibly can. It's a fast, above average, above pass rate over expectation offense, but not anything crazy. All right, getting to personnel. First concern with Sam Houston. Hunter Watson is at quarterback. They said they might use multiple quarterbacks. So Mabry Matower comes in from Wisconsin. He's a former 4-star. He fits the offense a little better. And then Landon Locke's a freshman, I believe, with this team. I have no idea what they're going to get out of him. But Watson, last year, he's running, this ball control offense that passed not very often and completed 62.3% of them for 1,811 yards, 12 touchdowns, 8 picks. He had 8 big-time throws and 13 turnover-worthy plays. Where he did his damage was on the ground. 647 yards. That was 3.9 yards per carry. He scored 9 scores. That could have been better as well, but he took 26 sacks. He took a sack on 27.1% of the dropbacks where he was pressured, which is another major concern. So Three major concerns. One, he takes a lot of sacks. So playing in an air raid, that's a concern, assuming it's the air raid. Two, he throws a lot of interceptions. His turnover-worthy play rate is very high. Three, he's not used to this offense. It's brand new. So I have a lot of just systemic concerns with Sam Houston State moving the ball. I think their weapons are pretty decent. They upgraded their running back room with Shane Porter from North Texas, Elijah Green from Indiana, and Alton McCaskill from Arizona State. He's been everywhere now. It's been a long time since we saw him break out at Houston. So there are decent running backs. There are also decent receivers. They return a lot. Quavez Humphrey, Michael Phoenix, Malik Phillips are all back. Solid power forward transfer. Fernando Garza is back. It's a pretty efficient pass catcher group, especially for Conference USA. And their O-line has a lot returning. So they lost 3 starters from last year's group, but because of injuries and then players getting shuffled around, they have 5 players back that have started at some point in their career. The problem is only 2 of them were above average in Colt Dieterich and James Dawn II. This unit was 80th in pass blocking last year and 111th in run blocking. So I think you're going to see a lot of pressure over the season from this offensive line in the face of a quarterback who's not used to the offense, who's not a skilled passer, and does the best damage with his legs. Just a ton of systemic concerns for Sam Houston. That's before you even get to what they're facing on the other side. Western Kentucky only has 2 full-time starters back on defense. Yes, that is true, but they have a third, Virgil Marshall, who started in 2023. Those guys are all in the secondary. So you're only 3 starters back who are all pretty good or in the secondary. You want to be an air raid team throwing into that. Okay, maybe there's 2 holes. Well, they had Braxton Myers from Southern Miss, Jalen Lewis from Temple, Al-Mahahi from Charlotte. All of them were above average at their previous programs. That should fill out your secondary. That's a good secondary you're throwing into. Maybe you want to run the ball against him because I do think Phil Longo's a little run heavier than people think. Well, Jalen Wester comes in from Colorado. He didn't play a ton there, but previously with FAU, he was a stud. The defensive line has 11 transfers. Yeah, they lost a lot. They lost a ton. But you have solid transfers from high-level programs. Vincent Sneed's from Indiana. Josiah McKnight's from Mississippi State. Robbie Harrison's from Indiana. Solid starters like Jaden Gray coming from Louisiana Tech. Those aren't walk-ons either. Those are players that were recruited generally a 3-star caliber. This defensive line has the chance to be a little bit better. They were 100th in run defense last year. It's not like this Western Kentucky defense was any good. They were 95th. So people talking about all the change in this back end, there's not a lot of room for them to be worse. And there's a chance if the transfers are better, which they generally look like they are, this defense could be improved. As far as the Western Kentucky offense going up against Sam Houston, there is a lot of change, but I think you can just bank on it a little bit more because, one, you're not undergoing a seismic change in your system. You're remaining with the air raid. You bring in an OC who has been with the quarterback. Last year, this was a pairing at Abilene Christian, and it was a solid pairing at that. Maverick McIver, first of all, he was originally a Texas Tech commit. He's a 3-star. He's not a low-level FCS guy. He went down to the FCS to get playing time. 62.5% completion, over 3,800 yards. That was 7.7 yards per attempt. He had 20 big-time throws, 10 turnover-worthy plays. He's not a mobile guy, but he's running an air raid. He should be solid. The only major concern is he needs to take a step up into Conference USA. It's the weakest conference in FBS, so the gap shouldn't be all that crazy. Skill position players, I don't know if they're quite as good as Sam Houston. I think there's a chance. Running back is full of new faces, some lower-level guys. Jaden McGill from Tennessee State, Lavelle Wright from Austin Peay are going to join Jalen Hampton and George Hart. This team wants to throw the ball, and their main players that return are Katie Hutchinson and Musa Berry. I think that's a decent place to start, but you're going to rely on transfers. Quincy Burrows from Wisconsin, Jairus Mack from Charlotte. There's Kelby Williams from Old Dominion. It's not a flashy group, but it is a group that could be better than Sam Houston. I think this is up for grabs. I do like their tight end room. Landon West from Florida State, Justin Wolf from Kansas State are 2 higher-level transfers for a program like this. But then you get to the offensive line. They're returning way less production. They have 1 starter back. It's their left tackle, Marshall Jackson. So you compare that with Sam Houston, who is 5 back who started before. I still think you have a higher ceiling with Western Kentucky because they bring in 8 transfers. They bring in some from the Power 4, alongside some G5 starters. Carson Upchurch is from Mississippi State. Weston Wallace is from Georgia Southern. He started there. Lawrence Seymour's from Akron. He started there. We've seen the Sam Houston starters. We've seen them play poorly. We've seen Western Kentucky starters play well, albeit at different stops. I think there's a potential significant advantage on the offensive line for this team. And then you get to defense. What are they facing? This was a strength for Sam Houston last year. Now, they did have some problems. Some of their numbers they're inflated because of who they faced. It's Conference USA. You don't face a lot of good QBs. So you get the 30th ranked coverage unit, 37th ranked pass rush. They were 113th against the run, leading to the 67th overall defense. But now you lose your top 16 players in terms of snaps. Top 16 are gone. They went transfer heavy. The front 7 is full of FCS guys, full of lower level guys. The secondary should probably be a strength. There's actually some decent transfers here. We're talking Houston, Wisconsin, Troy, Bowling Green. That theoretically matches up with Western Kentucky on paper, who was an air raid. The problem is we just have the gap in terms of talent still so wide that adding these transfers is not enough to close the gap. And then if Western Kentucky decides to play a little bit more through the ground, this could be like a hot knife cutting through butter with these FCS transfers on Sam Houston's defensive line and linebacker room. This is a chance to be one of the worst defenses in the conference. We make this well outside the minus 10.5. We missed a key number at 10. That's just me being slow to the jump on this. I don't really see a huge threat of this getting through like 11 and 11.5. So honestly, I'm just waiting on a minus 10 potentially coming back. I don't know if there's going to be any Sam Houston buyback during the week. I would be shocked if there is. But if there is, we'll jump on a minus 10 when it gets there. If you do have this minus 10 on ESPN bet available, this is one I would take immediately. But just no real incentive to rush to the window on this. You never know what's going to happen through the week. And again, injury reports for these teams are going to come out on Saturday morning, allegedly, according to the conference. So I don't want to also get backed into something weird in the event there's an injury when I'm sitting just past the key number. So we'll wait. The only other thing to say, I do like the under on this total. We made it closer to the original over-under. We have this at 60 points. Again, the major concern I have is Sam Houston's defense. I think Western Kentucky's defense is going to be fine in this game, stopping Sam Houston's offense. And the other things are, I don't think Sam Houston's offense is, one, going to be as effective as people think. It's a massive change for an offense that doesn't have the player personnel to run this offense. Second, I think they're going to be a little run heavier and slower than people think. People didn't actually go out and do their work on what goes into a total. Plus, Western Kentucky running 1,000 plays with Abilene Christian OC. Look at how many games they played in their time of possession. You'll get a different pace number than just raw plays. So we tentatively look at the under. It's been soaring up. I'm on an island with the under there, so I'm not going to play that. But yeah, we'll have something on Western Kentucky. We'll play the 10.5 if we absolutely have to. Final game. What a mess of a game this is. Stanford heads out to the island to face Hawaii. This is coming in at a -2 consensus in favor of Hawaii. This pushed 3 for a little bit. Stanford got some buyback recently, earlier this week. The total in the game is around 50-50.5. This has moved a lot. There is some wind in the forecast on the island. So depending on Saturday morning forecast, if this jumps like 2 or 3 points or something, that's probably why. The over has actually been getting some buyback already. But yeah, that's why part of the reason why this is so low. But anyway, changes for mainly Stanford. There's the Troy Taylor scandal. He's gone. They bring in an interim head coach in Frank Reich. They have a new OC in Nate Byam. He's an internal promotion. He was the tight ends coach. He's like 26. He's never called plays before. I believe he was a co-OC of Albany, some East Coast team previously. Bobby April's in place as DC. That's not a good thing. He's been awful, but he's the only entrenched player, or coach, I should say, in their previous role. Hawaii, it's still Timmy Chang. He's not quite had the start he wanted to. He's 13-25. They were 5-7 last year. They do have some changes. Anthony Arsenault was promoted to OC. That doesn't really matter a ton because Timmy Chang calls the plays. Dennis Thurman is the DC. They actually improved a lot on defense last year, so that was solid. But overall, not expecting a ton of changes. The probably a little more pro style for Stanford. Last year, they were a 48.3% pass rate team that was 62nd. They're going to be horrible, so I don't think overall that changes a ton, but maybe in this game, you see them run a little bit more with a tight spread. They were 70th in pace of play. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets a little slower. Hawaii was 4th in pass rate. They were using the run and shoot. 36th in pace. They were at 24.9 seconds per play. As far as the personnel, I have questions with both quarterbacks, probably a little more with Hawaii. Ben Branson, the Oregon State transfer, won the job for Stanford. He's 6'3", 218. He started at various points now, just not very good. 62% completion, 7.4 yards per attempt, 12 big-time throws, 13 turnover-worthy plays, doesn't run, 14.5% pressure to sack ratio. He's just pretty average, and he's in a worse situation than he was with Oregon State. Hawaii starting Micah Alejado. I wouldn't say I'm a fan. He has a lot of fans out there. For a guy who's played essentially one game against New Mexico, I'm a little bit surprised. He threw a couple passes in some other games. The reason he has fans is he looked awesome in that game. 70% completion percentage for 585 yards. It was 8.4 yards per attempt. 6 touchdowns, no picks, 2 big-time throws, 0 turnover-worthy plays. Also ran for 67 yards at 3.4 yards per carry. But he did take 3 sacks. That's a 20% pressure to sack ratio. That's not good. He needs to improve that. And all of this needs the context that he played against New Mexico, who fielded the worst defense in the FCS. So you could argue one of two ways. Okay, he looked awesome. He looked awesome against the worst team in college football. How do we blend this all together? Well, luckily, you can model this, and you can take a player with a very small sample against the worst defense in college football, who was a 3-star recruit, a low to mid 3-star recruit, the 92nd ranked quarterback in his class, and you can project this player moving forward based on historical results. And what you get is a player who has a slightly above average career. Take with that what you will. Overall, it's not the best. Generally, mid 3 stars who have one good game against the worst team in college football don't go on to be historic quarterbacks for their program. There are outliers. He absolutely could be, but it goes the other way too. He could absolutely lose this job. They have a 4-star behind him who I think probably should have won, has a higher ceiling overall, unless Demarcus Davis is just that bad. But anyway, quarterback questions with both teams. I'm not giving the edge to Hawaii. They do not deserve it based on what they've shown so far in that small sample. The skill position players, they're questionable for both teams, definitely more questionable for Stanford. They have all their running backs back, led by Micah Ford, the sophomore. He is 220. He's 6 feet. I think there's a potential for him. I just think the infrastructure is so bad around him. The O-line's bad. They have poor QB play. He's sort of just running with an ankle weight on. I mean, I don't know what to say. They only have 1 catchback at wide receiver. So, I mean, they're going to emphasize Sam Roush, their tight end. He had 40 catches last year. They're probably going to use more 12 personnel. One of the only transfers they brought in was Brendan Doyle from Memphis. Now, he was pretty bad at Memphis. So I don't really even know if 12 personnel is a good group to use. But your wide receiver room is atrocious. CJ Williams from Wisconsin is going to be your wide receiver 1. They already lost Pantelis for the year at wide receiver. So and they lost John Anthony, or at least they didn't lose him. He wasn't even on the 2 deep. He's been injured in fall camp. So this group already has the chance to be potentially weaker than we thought. And then you look at Hawaii. Landon Sims and Cam Barfield are pretty good running backs. They don't run a ton, 4th lowest rate in the country, but they've been decent when asked to do so. Nick Senecal and Pofeli Ashlock are a good tandem at wide receiver. Ashlock took a pretty big step back last year. He was at 200 fewer yards than 2023, and he had much better efficiency in 2023. If he regains form, this is a chance to be vastly better than Stanford. But it kind of just remains to be seen. Could just be Senecal outperforming Ashlock. I'm not sure. But overall, you have 2 guys that are pretty solid. Jackson Harris looks like your 3rd starter from Stanford, a former consensus 3-star. Some services had him as a 4. I think the weapons are pretty close. I would favor Hawaii, but I don't think it's quite as drastic as people are making this out to be. The offensive line, I have concerns with both teams, more so on Stanford's, especially because they've made some weird decisions, and they were 96th in pass blocking, 107th in run blocking last year, so it's not like this is great, but they're starting Nicky Prongos, the UCLA transfer, at left tackle. He's a former walk-on. He's been the worst tackle I've ever seen, so trotting him out there is a concern. Khalil House is the right tackle. He was awful last year. The only guy who's maybe decent is Nick Fadig from Texas Tech, and he hasn't played a ton. That's just a projection based on his recruitment. Overall, they have 2 former starters, 2 transfers playing here, but I don't think you can trust the development of this group at all. Hawaii was actually 67th in pass blocking, 56th in run blocking. They have 3 starters back, 2 of them above average. James Milovale at right tackle was not fantastic, but they do lose their best player from this unit, DeCambra. He was their left tackle. So there are some concerns. The newcomers they have, and there's 2 just brand new guys, they're unproven, really low-level recruits. So there's a chance this goes south. That's just what you get when you play really low-level guys. There's no way around it. We make Hawaii a little better on paper, but not significantly. I think that's just a mistake people are making, is like Hawaii's roster is recruited to be significantly worse than Stanford's. So when you have newcomers coming in for Hawaii, there's a chance they're much worse than Stanford's. And honestly, like, Frank Reich is an NFL coach. If someone's going to get the most out of these 4 stars finally at Stanford, could it be him? Maybe. My biggest problem with Stanford, honestly, is the defense. And we actually make their defense better than Hawaii's. And Hawaii is a pretty strong defense. But overall, it's sort of this push and pull. Stanford actually has a lot of former 4 stars on defense. They have 4 former edge rushers on the defensive line right now, playing edge. But the thing is, what has Bobby April been doing? He has not developed a single good defensive player since he's been here. They were 102nd in total defense, 93rd in run defense, 51st in pass rush, 117th in coverage. So I have a really hard time reconciling this. Generally, coaches that have been this bad do not remain with their teams this long. Now, Stanford's probably going to fire him after this year, but it's really hard to reconcile this. This is a good defensive line. They should give Hawaii problems, especially their newcomers on the offensive line, but they just haven't shown that they can do it. The linebacker room is remade. I think Hunter Barth from Cal is a pretty good transfer. Secondary is 4 starters back. A lot of people giving Jordan Washington from Dartmouth the business. I don't like FCS transfers. But you have 4 returning starters that are all above average, some of them multi-year starters. We actually have Stanford with an edge in the secondary and defensive line on paper. Again, somewhat relying on Bobby April maximizing it, but which is a huge, huge question. But this Stanford defense is not as bad as people think. It's definitely better than their offense. Hawaii, they were 67th in total defense, 70th in run D, 103rd in pass rush, 29 in coverage. Again, much, much better than we thought. They do lose their top edge rusher and top 4 defensive tackles. So that's immediately a concern. Tariq Jones, their lone edge rusher who returns, was pretty good. And then their defensive tackle transfers are quite solid too. Dejon Benton from New Mexico, he's sort of been a career underachiever after he had a good recruitment. Then Luther McCoy from Minnesota and Kaio Akana from Utah. Neither of them have played much. So it kind of leaves the defensive line a little volatile. I like that they actually address the defensive tackle needs. Whether any of these players are good remains to be seen. And then Jones is solid off the edge. But overall, the defensive line is not a huge concern. It's just a little volatile. At linebacker, they lose 2 of their top 4, but their main returner, Jalen Smith, was solid. Giovanni Iovino from San Diego was a good FCS starter. That San Diego team was pretty decent last year, so that's pretty solid. Secondary is 4 back, led by Elijah Palmer and Peter Manuma. Their major weak link is Jaheim Wilson-Jones. They'll need him to play much better. He's a guy who was a liability last year. And they also need Verdell Edwards to regain form after he got hurt. The secondary is much stronger from Hawaii on paper, but the defensive line has enough upside to come together with the development of some of those transfers who are from P4 programs. So I think Hawaii has some advantages. Hawaii has one of the best home fields in the country. It's just a tough travel place. Now it's week 0, so you have extra time to prepare for this stuff. But still, overall, a couple angles. First of all, we don't think Stanford's defense is quite as bad as some other people. They just have too much talent to be that bad. And there are concerns with Hawaii. They're starting a brand new QB, inexperienced QB, behind an offensive line that has some questions as well. First point. Second, Hawaii's defense is pretty good. And they're facing a Stanford offense, which could be utterly inept with their offensive line, a journeyman pocket passing QB, and no weapons to speak of. We make this under. The weather is a holdup for me. I would love it if the weather got worse. Generally, the market reacts this quickly, so I'm not even sure I could get it in on time. Let's take a look at the current total. But overall, Stanford should be playing slower. They should have much, much worse offensive efficiency this year. The first place we're looking is under, and it's come up to 51 in some spots. There's a weird 51.5 with a ton of juice. I wouldn't take that. But that's the first place we look. Second, we show some value on Stanford. I can't do it. I can't get there. Again, we do this from the bottom up. Who are the players on your team? How do we expect them to do? Who are the coaches on your team? The reconciliation that needs to be made is, why is this coaching staff so bad at developing the talent they have? They are not the worst team in terms of talent. Just haven't been able to get there. So is Frank Reich the guy that instills some heart into this team? I don't know. But the thing I'll say is, I'm not willing to pay to find out in week one. If Stanford's a little better than we think, I would rather risk my hard-earned money on them in week 2 or 3 or something, not against Hawaii. But I'm also not taking Hawaii either. There's enough concerns there. So to recap the show briefly, in the first game, took Kansas State -3. I'm going to end up with something on the over in that game. Just no real incentive to bet it now. Hopefully 49.5 or 49 is the desired number. Second game, Fresno State versus Kansas. Debating an under is the main play here. Show some value on Fresno. Can't take them with all the changes in that offense. They did too many weird things with the depth chart. So that will probably be an under, one we will wait on. Kentucky, absolutely going to take them. -10.5 if I have to. Gonna hold out, hope, very little hope, but some, that it gets down to -10. Maybe we'll buy a -10 if I have to. I hate doing that, but we just missed the best number. They will be on the card, though. Think there's a chance they absolutely smash Sam Houston. I lean under in this game. Not sure if I will play it. The underplay, it's a lot of this just depends on how you put in pass rates and pace of play for Sam Houston and Western Kentucky. I tend to lean them being a little slower than people think and a little run heavier. But I could be wrong on that. I seem to be on an island, so not one I'm willing to stake my money in yet. And that's just with the, guys, sometimes I'm wrong on these things, and I know that, so I'm not going to go out and just assume that I'm right and everyone else is wrong. Sometimes when you're on an island, you need to at least think about the other sides, what I'm trying to do. But we'll end up on Western Kentucky. Final game, the one I have the least interest in betting right now. I would need a +3 to consider Stanford. Can't get there. I'm interested in the under. Both of these defenses are better than the offenses. The only real concern I have with Stanford is their coaching is so bad. So probably will end up off this game entirely. We'll debate an under. Weather is a factor, so we'll see on that. But overall, that is where we stand on week 0. Sorry for the live odds screen the whole time. We'll have some graphics made up for hopefully week 1. But until then, let me know what you guys would like change. What would you like to see on graphics? That would help me too. What helps you evaluate matchups. But otherwise, thank you for watching. Went an hour on 4 games. We need to speed that up. But until next time, good luck, everyone. We'll see you later.